Yo, hell yeah. Wyatt begins in like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Yo, welcome to Wyatt. And I'm your host, Wyatt O'Brien Evans. Grrr, woof, goddammit, woof, 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 woof. Hi to all my YouTubers out there. If you like what you hear and if you like what you see, just click that subscribe button at the bottom of your screens. Just click it, click it, click it, click it. I loves to click it. Yeah. Well, hi. Today's Wyatt is a treat. We have on tap Mr. Kaelan Strouse, the popular ecstatic spirituality coach. Now, y'all might ask, what in the hell is an ecstatic spirituality coach? Well, let's find out right now. So, without further ado, Wyatt welcomes a bonafide multi-hyphenate, y'all. Author, actor, producer, director, and the popular spirituality coach, Mr. Kaelan Strouse. Talk at me, baby. How the hell are ya?
What's up? Oh, it's so nice to be here with you, Wyatt. Thank you so much for having me.
Listen, man, it's my pleasure. Thank you for stopping by, Wyatt. Okay. The first thing I want to ask you about is please define ecstatic spirituality coach.
Oh, I love that. I call myself an ecstatic spirituality coach because I really don't know what else to call me.
Okay.
So for me, I chose those words because ecstatic implies the idea of having an experience of life that is beyond the mundane, that is beyond just the drudgery. And I think some people think of spirituality as being really austere and boring and something that you do, in a place you don't necessarily want to be, or at least that was my experience growing up of being dragged to church where you're like, oh, this is so dull. So this idea that your spiritual life can be something orgasmic and juicy, beautiful, that you should be living in a way where you see miracles around you, where you're regularly experiencing awe, where you're regularly experiencing ecstasy, and seeing your life as this effervescent, magical sort of experience. And then, so that's the ecstatic part. And then the spiritual coach part is, I'm a big believer that to create change, meaningful change in life, is an internal journey. It's one of really digging in and rooting into yourself, and that change in the outer world comes when we change within. And so the spiritual journey is the journey to one's soul. It's the journey to one's core, to one's heart. And so kind of bringing that all together of saying that the journey home is the same journey to find ecstasy, to find God, to find the universe, whatever you want to call it, and bringing all of yourself, all the juicy bits to the table.
Man, that is a delicious, substantive way of putting it. So, Kay, why did you take this path professionally and personally?
I think paths choose us rather than we choose paths some of the time. Right. Or some might say that you come into this life with a soul's purpose, and then the universe will just kind of guide you that way to be where you need to belong. Mm-hmm. From when I was a little kid, I was always very interested in how can I make the world a better place? And how can I do something that is impactful? And at the same time, too, I found a sort of cadence, a sort of rhythm in performing, where that felt like a place where I got to shine, where I experienced success, where I experienced joy. And so earlier in my life, I thought I would make a positive impact in the world through acting and directing. But the universe kind of said no. They're like, no, don't go that way. You've probably done that in past lives. You've made those choices. You've explored those ways. I think you need to work a little more directly with people. And so I'm somebody who have been very lucky in my life that anything I've ever wanted or needed has showed up. I'm somebody who is unintentionally or intentionally very good at manifesting, but the one area where I kept hitting roadblocks again and again was working as an actor in a way that I didn't experience anywhere else in my life. And I reached a point in my acting career where I felt like I was on the precipice of things finally taking off. And I had meetings with really big agents and producers. And I had this realization that I would have to give up so much to make that my reality. I would have to give up meaningful relationships. I'd have to give up my then fiance. I would have to eat, breathe, sleep, that world. And I just realized my priorities had changed. I just realized that when I got to the end of my life, I'd look back and be happier for prioritizing wellness, happiness, community, belonging, being of service. And so I left acting, didn't know what I wanted to do, knew that I was a creative spirit, knew that I was somebody who wanted to make an impact on the world. And I took a job doing coaching. I started to work with Fortune 50 companies around the world where they would hire actors to teach executive presence, public speaking, communication skills. And I got to travel all around working with people, teaching empathy. And it was good work. It was meaningful work. But I knew it's not where my heart belonged. And so when the pandemic started and all that work came to an end because no one was doing anything in person, both my husband and several of my mentors were like, I think it's time where you bring all of your experiences together and start working directly with people one-on-one. And so with my background as an actor and director, my background as a coach, and then also as a yogi, I started teaching yoga and meditation in college. So I've been doing that since 2008. I lived in a meditation community for a number of years. I kind of brought that all together to what I now do with Ecstatic Self, where I help people connect with their authentic self, learn meditative and spiritual practices to root into themselves, to find more clarity, to find more joy, to deal with being a fully embodied real person that's inclusive of their sexuality. Because for me, sex and sexuality was something very scary and something dangerous and something I repressed for many years. And so much of my journey of becoming, of finding myself, has been through those roots. Bringing that all together. And so in 2020, I wrote my first book. I started my YouTube channel. I started my coaching practice, and immediately everything clicked into place. Immediately I was getting lots of subscribers and people wanting to work with me one-on-one. And it was that big yes from the universe saying, yes, this is what you've been meant to do. This is what you've been working towards. And over the last 3 years of doing this, I've just gotten yes after yes after yes of affirmation saying, you're doing what you're meant to do. This is your purpose. This is your mission. This is where you belong. And interestingly enough, my husband first met me 8 years ago, and I was working professionally as an actor at that point still. He said to me, you're not an actor. And I was like, no, of course I am. He's like, no, you're a spiritual teacher. I see that in you so clearly. And I'm like, okay, no, I'm an actor, but thanks. I appreciate it. And then he proved to be right.
Well, you know what? We're going to save a lot of this for a little bit later because I've got a lot of questions about your educational experience, the whole acting, entertainment business rather than your coming out process. You're a fascinating person, my friend, because during my research, I've found a lot of really juicy quotes that are poignant and make a lot of sense. And let me tell the audience one of them. You stated, and I quote, as long as you hang your worth on societal approval, on people telling you that you are good enough, it is going to be a never-ending race. We should learn to love ourselves, learn to see ourselves as enough, end quote. Let's dig into that.
I think a lot of people, myself included, spend a lot of our energy when we're not aware of it, searching for what's called extrinsic validation, which means we find validation through other people's approval.
Right.
We find validation through, oh, that's a great coat, your body's so sexy, yada, yada, yada. Versus intrinsic. Intrinsic means I do these things because they make me feel good. I wear this coat because I like how it makes me feel. I feel sexy, or I feel comfortable in it. I work out because I like how my body looks and I feel good in it. And for myself, one of the reasons I was really drawn to acting as a young person in my teenage years is that you get a lot of validation from society, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's the audience's applause or seeing your name on a marquee or a casting director telling you, yes, you're the best one of the 400 people we've seen earlier today.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing about when we hang our hat on that kind of approval is that we're always seeking for the next hit of validation. And it's the same thing with social media. We all experience it, that if you do that post and it gets a certain number of likes or a certain number of shares, we feel really good. But that validation is really fleeting. And it's a little bit like eating popcorn at the movies, where you have one bite of popcorn and you immediately need another bite of popcorn. And that is opposed to finding real validation. And that comes from within, yes, but it also comes from our sacred circle. Those 5 people who mean the most to you, your mentors, your teachers, your partners, your best friends, the family members that you're close to, when they really stop and see you and say, you matter, I see you, you are valuable, I love who you are and what you do and what you contribute to our world. That kind of validation lasts a hell of a lot longer. And that kind of validation we can build true self-worth from. And unfortunately, the way our world is geared right now is we're so divorced from community. So many of us lead lives of isolation. So many people even now say they don't even have one close friend that they can turn to. The statistics around it are really staggering and sad. And so we try to replace those things with fast food. We try to replace it with that movie theater popcorn where, okay, well, I don't have somebody giving me genuine sense of self-worth, but I'm going to post that thing online and I'll feel better for a little bit. I'll get that hit and it'll be fine for right now. But as we're seeing, it's just leading to more and more mental health issues and more depression and more anxiety and more feelings of disconnection. And so our need to really root into what truly feeds us, what is feeding our deep human bits, face to face, body to body, heart to heart.
Wow, that is so on point, because, and then you have people, too many of us, who go on social media and see other people and we want their lives, and we don't realize that some of what we see could very well be an illusion, and we don't know what those people are going through in their personal lives. Amen. So, yeah, so social media can be the devil, as they say.
As someone very wise once said, don't compare your dailies to somebody else's highlight reel. The dailies are all the footage that came in from that day. And of course, people are going to post their most flattering angles and their best photos and their best moments on social media. And that's not real life. Like some of the videos I've been enjoying on like Instagram Reels right now, and people have done these for years, but I always appreciate seeing them, is somebody posting their like at the gym flex and really good lighting pose, and then immediately following it with them like 2 hours later back at home in normal lighting, and their pump is gone and suddenly they look like a normal person. Where at the gym, you're like, oh my God, their body's so incredible. It's what we see online is never the full story. And unfortunately, our brains don't know that. Our brains are not hardwired for the technological landscape we find ourselves in. There's millions of years evolving for a way of life that in the last century has been completely upended. And how do we recalibrate and remind ourselves? And it's very difficult, if not impossible, to fully do, but at least to have the awareness of it and to constantly reroute ourselves into community, slowness, belonging, human connection. And remember that what you see online is never the full story.
Absolutely. Thank you for telling us all that. Okay, let's travel through the corridors of time so we can find out all about your backstory. So tell us, where were you born and raised?
I grew up in suburban Chicago, which in some ways is a great place, but it's also, Midwesterners have this sort of vibe of, oh, we're really nice. But there's a lot of passive aggressiveness in the Midwest, or at least where I grew up.
Ow.
And so I grew up in a family with a father who's 20 years older than my mother.
Okay.
So he was about 48 years old when I was born. And my father was also a closeted bisexual. He came out to me about
Really?
years ago. Yeah.
Wow.
Also, my father, previous to marriage with my mother, was a swinger and a nudist and has had thousands of sexual partners. And my mother was, she's only ever had sex with my father, like I said, 20 years younger. So there was an interesting tension held in the
Yeah.
household. Shortly after I was born, my father was a very successful businessman and lost everything, went bankrupt,
Oh,
entered a
so
15-year
sorry.
depression. So that was kind of the landscape I was born into. There was a lot of tension in my household. But my parents have always been very, very loving. But with that tension in that household, and then also being somebody who came into this world as very empathic, very sensitive, very spiritually oriented. Like I can remember as a little kid having conversations with God, having, really deep spiritual experiences, even at a very young age, but just really not feeling like I was equipped to handle the world I entered into. Where when I started going to school, very quickly felt different from all of my peers. In hindsight, I was probably somewhere on the neurodivergent spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
but I just could not connect. I could not relate, and very quickly became bullied. I became the class scapegoat. That one kid who sat alone every day at lunch, the one kid who was always picked on. And so school is a very hard place for me because I did not fit in, I did not belong, and I felt completely isolated. And honestly, that continued up until the freshman year of high school. So by the time I got to middle school, it was hell on earth for me, where I quite literally couldn't walk down the hall without getting things thrown at me or being called faggot or just things that made me want to shrivel up and die.
I I can relate to that because I was bullied too in elementary, junior high, leveled off in senior high. But I totally get that.
Yeah.
Painful, painful.
Yeah, yeah, and that became the inspiration for my second book, which is an allegory of what it's like to grow up when you're different from everybody else. High school was a little bit better because I ended up in a gifted program with a bunch of nerds.
Right.
We were all awkward together, which was great. But then college got hard again. I went to Northwestern University, which is a very good school.
It is.
And I was a theater major. And one of the things I didn't quite appreciate at the time is most of the people who decide to go to Northwestern to study theater are people who come from a lot of money and come from a lot of social standing. And so I entered a place where I was totally unprepared for the social politicking. And I was, again, immediately thrust right down to the bottom of the totem pole and made to feel isolated and alone and completely separate from all my classmates. So college, again, was a really difficult time. While I was there, I started getting really deeply interested in spirituality. I started getting into yoga and meditation. I got kind of, we'll call it, discovered by a spiritual group that invited me in. And I ended up taking their head teacher as my guru for almost a decade. Lived with them for almost 7 years. And there was a lot of deep, true spiritual teachings and lessons I learned. However, at the same time, there was a tremendous amount of emotional and psychological abuse going on. In hindsight, I now recognize it was a cult and that I was targeted.
Get out.
But I did not realize that at that time. One of the things I do try to hold is just because there was a lot of manipulation and negativity doesn't mean that there wasn't also really positive things.
Sure.
And so I try to hold that in balance, but it was something that when I finally got thrown out of the cult, which is the best thing that ever happened to me, one of the best things, it took me a few years to recover from that experience.
Why were you thrown out of the cult?
I defended the guru's child because the guru's child had come out as trans and their parents were abusing them, and I stood up to protect them.
Whoa. So in hindsight, Kay, you realize that this group that you were in was actually a cult.
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah, and I think it's probably more common than people realize. And since then, I've done a lot of research on what makes a cult versus just a spiritual community. And it's something I'm going to do another YouTube video on soon. And there's a lot of gray area, right? But the fact that The person who led it was never approachable. You could never sit down and have a conversation with them. They could do nothing wrong. Everything they did was perfect. They were irreplaceable. No one could ever supplant them. Their word was law. They renamed you. They limited who you could interact with. You couldn't go home and visit your family. They told you where you could eat, what you could eat, where you could work, who you could date. There was a lot of control and things that were not very healthy. So while I was living there, I was also working simultaneously as an actor. So
I was going to ask you. Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
The place I lived was in Chicago, so I worked predominantly in Chicago as an actor. During that time, I worked for most of the major theaters in Chicago, Writers Theater, like some Tony Award-winning theaters, Writers Theater, Northlight Theater, several of the big ones. Timeline. I did a summer at Montana Shakespeare in the Parks. I did commercials for Reebok, Muscle Milk, Home Depot. When I was 27, I became SAG eligible and got cast in a play that took me to Los Angeles, which I thought was everything I ever wanted. So I finally moved out of the meditation community, moved to LA, moved there and worked a lot. I got an agent, got a manager, booked 11 things in 5 months.
Wow. Things
finally felt like they were clicking, but I just, again, realized this wasn't what I actually wanted. So I gave that up, moved back to Chicago, moved in with my then fiance, now husband, and left acting, started to figure out what went next, and moved with him around the country, moved from Chicago to Florida, to DC, to Maryland, back to DC. Through it all, I have learned a lot about myself, really grown into myself, into a really joyful, confident person that I wasn't back then. And over this journey too, I really wrangling with my sexuality, because I didn't start my coming out process till I was 25.
I was going to, you know what, boy, we are so in sync. It's like you can read my mind. You're taking me on this journey. Yeah, I believe your coming out process had twists and turns and cliffhangers, so to speak.
Yeah, I wasn't one of those people who was easily able to understand my orientation. Mm-hmm. When I was little, like 6 or 7, I knew I was attracted to guys. I also knew I liked boobs, so that was a little confusing. But I knew that there was a good chance I could be gay. And I remember pleading with God as a little kid, please don't let me be gay, please don't let me be gay. And I was so, even at an early age, driven to become a successful actor. I knew that if I was gay, it would prevent me from being a leading man, or so I thought. And so I suppressed the knowledge from myself. So by the time I entered puberty, I had no idea what I was attracted to. And also personally, I've never been somebody who's been into sexual fantasies. I don't particularly like a lot of porn. So I was confused by that. I thought I just wanted to look hypermasculine, which was true, but not that I would be attracted to men. And so I was very confused. As I entered my early 20s, I thought maybe I was asexual. I didn't know. Finally, I started dating around 25, realized that I was mostly attracted to men, although a few exceptions, but mostly attracted to men. Mm-hmm. But it was a very difficult process. And part of it for me, I really do credit to being a meditator and being on a spiritual path, because meditation and the spiritual work should ideally take you out of your frame of mind and give you a different perspective, give you that outsider perspective to see things from new angles and new vantages. And it sort of allowed me to crack open the egg. It allowed the walls to start to crumble a little bit so I could ask those difficult questions, see it from different perspectives, and start to venture outside my comfort zone. So I feel very blessed that I eventually was able to do my coming out journey and now help other people with sex and sexuality. Actually, a really funny moment. When I was 24, I was a friend convinced me to attend a Neo-Tantra massage workshop. I was so nervous, I was shaking. But as I was walking in, I heard a voice say to me, this is part of the work you're meant to be doing. And there's only been a few times in my life where I've heard a voice speak to me. But in this moment, I was not ready to hear it. I was like, absolutely not. No, you're wrong. What? Shut up. No, go away.
Okay. All right. Wonderful. Okay. I have to ask you this question, and I call it the dick question.
Sure.
You've undergone surgery to supersize your dick, so to speak. So as Mr. Spock of Star Trek would say, fascinating, simply fascinating. Tell us why you did it and what that process, the procedure was like.
So, like I said, when I was younger, I was always fascinated by hypermasculinity. I was always
Mhm.
fascinated by guys with huge muscles and giant cocks.
Yeah, me
I
too.
was like 5 or 6 years old. I would play dress up by putting like one blanket under my shirt to make it look like I had huge pecs and delts, and then put another one down my
Ah.
pants to make it look like I had a 2 foot long dick. On my 8th birthday, I wished for a 13-inch penis. So it's been something that has been in my mind since I can remember. When I was in college and shortly after college, I started to get into penis enlargement techniques. I started to do pumping and stretching and weight hanging and all that fun stuff. I think I got up to hanging 25 pounds of weight off my dick to stretch it at one point, which is
Whoa.
intimidating. And I reached a point in my, about a year ago,
Mhm.
where it was something that I didn't feel like I could let go of. Like it felt like I couldn't ever stop the desire of wanting to be bigger. And I would spend sometimes an hour or two a day doing those things, pumping and stretching. And it reached a point where I just said, I want my life back. I don't want to care about these things anymore. I've tried my hardest to let go and not care about
Mhm.
having a gigantic penis, as weird as it sounds. But I can't. And for me, I think a huge part of that stems from the fact that as a little kid who was constantly being bullied, so much of that bullying was around masculinity and telling me I wasn't man enough, telling me I wasn't strong enough, telling me I wasn't masculine enough. And so for me, there was, and I think for a lot of guys, this equation between penis size and masculinity, penis
Yeah.
size and your worth as a man.
Absolutely.
And so prior to my surgery, I had stretched and pumped my penis up to be about 9 inches long and about 5.5 inches in girth. So a really big dick. But I knew that if I had penis enlargement surgery, one of the stipulations is you can no longer do any of those things post surgery. Whatever you end up with is what you end up with. You can't do any of that
Okay.
anymore. So I opted to have the surgery. Post surgery, it added about a little bit more length, but like 2.5 inches of girth. So
Whoa.
it became freakishly huge, which
Whoa.
is kind of what I wanted.
Whoa. Well, how long was the healing process?
Well, you're not allowed to have sex for 8 weeks or masturbate for 8 weeks post surgery.
Mm.
But they say that it takes, you're like considered like healed after 6 months, fully healed after a year. But, more or less live a normal life. It doesn't really affect my day to day stuff. But, even I'm at about like 7, 8 months now. And I will say, like, you still see changes from week to week. Like it's still evolving.
Mm. Interesting. Do you find that you are fetishized? That you're the object of a fetish, of a big dick fetish?
Uh, honestly, I post surgery, I was all about like, oh, I want to show off my new toy. I want people to admire it, and I've kind of reached a point now where it's something that I don't really talk about as much.
Sure.
Like you know, when I am chatting with people, like me and my husband technically have an open relationship. We rarely have sex with anybody else, but
Mhm.
on occasion we'll invite somebody in to play with us. But like I find myself now, like I don't even mention it. Like if they've seen me online and they know about it, that's one thing. But
Right.
if we're meeting somebody and getting to know them either as a friend or as a potential playmate, like I don't bring it up because for me, one of the things I've learned about myself is that I enjoy sex when there's a sense of connection and a sense of,
Hmm. Yes.
and so for me, that's really so much more about a person's heart. I don't really get off just on bodies. I wish I did. I feel like sex would be so much easier in some ways.
Yeah.
But for me, enjoying a sexual experience is about the heart connection. So I don't necessarily want to go be fetishized by people with about having a big cock.
Absolutely.
I'm sure it happens still, but for me, it's something that really is about me feeling more confident and comfortable in my own skin, and it's something for me that like I like the aesthetics of it. Like I like having such a huge dick. I like how I feel in the locker room. I like how I feel with my clothes off. I like how I feel when I'm masturbating. But it's not necessarily about the validation from a sexual partner.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Excuse me, I almost lost my voice. I love it. I'll get serious for a minute or so. I believe earlier this year, you were sexually assaulted. Do you
Yeah,
feel? Yeah. Do you feel comfortable in telling us a little bit about that?
Yeah, no, I'm totally fine with it now. And honestly, it wasn't so dramatic as for the experience after, which was I was at a Korean spa with a friend and I
Mm-hmm.
signed up to get a body scrub, which is where they lay you naked on a table and take a rough cloth and scrub you down really hard and then give you a massage while you're on the table. And it's in a public space. People at the spa can look in and see you while you're getting this done.
Right.
And while it was happening, it started to feel a little more sensual than I was expecting. But
Mm-hmm.
I've had these at least a dozen times before, and they'll scrub your perineum, they'll scrub your testicles, they'll just move your dick out of the way. So it gets very handsy. And so I was confused at the beginning of like, is this getting more sensual? And I wasn't sure, but then there's something kind of like titillating of, is it? Like, is that what's happening? I don't know. And then it started to cross the line, but it was the line where you think you know how you respond in those situations. You think you would respond in a certain way, and then it's happening and you find you're not. And, I think the combination for me of being in a public space and part of me thinking, well, I don't really want this, but it's also kind of like a weird, like sexual fantasy of somebody wanting to do this to you.
Sure.
And also, like you're being in kind of like this very altered state of mind when you're getting a massage and it's like you feel cared for and protected and so relaxed. And, I didn't stop the person. Like
Right.
I didn't stop them for whatever reason, for the reasons I mentioned.
Sure.
And so, they jerked me off and they penetrated me anally, which is something I don't usually ever let somebody do who isn't my husband.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really uncomfortable. Like getting up from the table, I was like, I feel really weird about this happening. But then the next day I noticed that because this was 5 weeks post-surgery when I wasn't cleared for sexual activity, that they had damaged my penis. And when I went to go see my doctor, I had to go have emergency surgery
Oh my
that
goodness.
day unexpectedly, which is, full anesthesia, laid out on the table, have to have somebody drive you home. And what was so hard about it is I had posted right afterwards on social media about it. And because
Yeah.
I have somewhat of a social media presence now, it was taken out of context and people started posting it elsewhere online and making fun of me. And it
Oh
was the
no.
number one trending thing on like this major Reddit forum for that day. And just people laughing and making fun of it. And like, I get the idea that people think men can't be raped. And I get people have this idea that if something happens to you, you'll be in a position where you can stand up to defend yourself. And I get that too. It was a weird situation where I had been open about having surgery. And so there were questions about that as well. It was just really nasty to be in such a vulnerable place and to feel like people were just trashing you for this really uncomfortable and messy experience you just had.
Well, I mean, it's a violation. And even more than raping your body, it's like raping your mind and your soul. All of that plays into it.
Yeah, I will say, and when you asked, am I being fetishized for my big dick? One of the things I've come to appreciate, especially now post-surgery, especially because, for a lot of people, I have one of the biggest dicks they've ever seen, if not the,
Mm-hmm.
is people want to come and grab it and play it with it and touch it.
I can imagine.
And that's something where I've now gotten very used to. Not that I appreciate it, and I've gotten much better at saying no.
Mm.
But saying, for people, it's an object of fascination. And I will say, as somebody who is pretty sexually comfortable and comfortable in his skin and not offended by much, like it really doesn't offend me when somebody comes up and touches me or uses me in a way that I didn't give them permission to. I'd prefer they didn't. And now I feel comfortable to say no and to stop it. But it's now something that has come to happen on a fairly regular basis. And I think that's also part of why I've become much more demure about my surgery and having such a big penis, is just being like, I don't necessarily want to be handled in that way.
Oh, understandably. Kaelan, why should someone see a spirituality coach, particularly an ecstatic spirituality coach, and why should they come see you?
I think people I work with me for different reasons. I have a lot of people who come with me because they're struggling with their sexual identity, or they're struggling with, even if they are out, really accepting themselves fully.
Right.
I have people who want to better understand meditation, who people want to understand spiritual esoteric philosophy. I have people who want to connect more with their sexual energy and to be more empowered and to feel like they are a proud sexual being. The thing that I tell people is, I think in today's modern world, and especially if you're in the LGBTQ community, especially if you're a gay man, that if you are going to have a connection with spirituality, it has to meet you where you are. You're not going to run off and join a monastery. You're not going to become a monk. You're not going to renounce, sex. You're not going to renounce alcohol. You're not going to renounce meat. And so you have to find a way of connecting to spirituality that is inclusive of the life you live and is celebratory of the life you live. Like, I don't think someone saying, love the sinner, hate the sin is an inclusive space. I feel like that's still really fucking judgmental. Yeah. And so to explore a spiritual path that says, not only are these things that other people tell you have been shameful or wrong or bad, not only am I not going to tell you that, but I'm going to tell you actually those are your gateways. You can use your sex life as a gateway to your highest self, towards a more evolved state of being. You can use being in the world and living in a city and making money. Like, you can use that as a path towards your own spiritual happiness and liberation, to have a more free life. And so that's what I really try to stress to people, is there is a way to feel connected with your soul, with your heart, with your body, with your mind, to be exploring these more existential, spiritual topics, but do it in a way that is affirming of who you are, what you are, where you're from, where you live, and to say all of you is beautiful, all of you is sacred, all of you belongs here, and you are perfect in the way you are made. You are perfect with all of your imperfections.
Thank you for telling us that. That's such a great message that needs to be soaked up like a sponge, because, there's just so much isolation and loneliness, right now. And thank you for telling us that.
Yeah. And anything we can do to assuage that a little bit, to bring a little more connection, to bring a little more community, to bring a little more sense of belonging, I think is such a valuable and worthwhile thing to pursue.
Absolutely. Well, before we jet off, what other projects do you have on tap for the rest of this year?
Well, my YouTube channel is always, of course, my main thing. I really love the work that we do there. It's the heart and soul of what I do. I, of course, do post more erotic stuff on OnlyFans, and I have a Patreon and a naked Twitter and all that.
Nice.
We're posting about all of those things. But my upcoming projects are, one, starting my next book. So my third book is about the intersection of masculinity, sex, and meditation.
Okay.
And how do we connect with all those things? And then my other big thing is trying to start scheduling in-person retreats. So one of the things I get from people all the time is saying, hey, I want to go work with you in person. I want to work in a group. So in 2024, I'm actively working to schedule hopefully 3 or 4 different opportunities for people to come together in a beautiful setting to find fellowship, find community, do some spiritual work, and root into themselves.
Very, very nice. How can we follow you and connect with you?
YouTube is my favorite, of course, youtube.com/ecstatic self. I have a regular Twitter, which is ecstatic self. You can also find a link to my not safe for work Twitter, the naked one. Do that, or it's
love it.
Ecstatic, K-E Ecstatic. And I'm on Instagram. Instagram recently deleted my profile because it was too sexy, so I'm starting again on that one. And then on Patreon, I'm Ecstatic Self. And if you want to find me on OnlyFans, I'm The Big Ohm.
Whoa. Well, Mr. Kaelan Strouse, I want to thank you for stopping by. Wyatt, I'm just at a loss for words. It was wonderful.
Well, it's such a pleasure, Wyatt. Thank you so much for including me.
Listen, my pleasure. Yeah. So y'all, there you have it. You can find the official Wyatt podcast page at WyattEvans.com, the go-to destination for LGBTQ plus news, features, commentary, and entertainment. WyattEvans.com is visited by more than 100 countries on the regular. All I can say to that is, hey, baby. And at WyattEvans.com, you'll find my Smoking Hot, HAWT Hot, Nothing Can Tear Us Apart series of novels. And as you just saw on the top, the newest installment is called Shattered. I said Shattered. And y'all, Shattered is full of action, danger, intrigue, sexually charged situations, passion, and all of the wonderful elements that you're used to in the Nothing Can Tear Us Apart series of novels. So get your new copy of Shattered. Now you can follow me, your host, Wyatt O'Brien Evans, all across social media, and poof, is right there for you to peruse, like TikTok and Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. And if you have any comments or whatever, you can hit me up at wyattonair@gmail.com. So until next time, y'all, woof, goddammit, woof, 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 woof. I said woof.